Thank you, Sifo, to invite me to give this sharing. I wouldn't call it lecture. I will call it sharing, because I think I'm going to take a different approach to discuss the art of resistance. And first, I would like to share what I'm going to discuss here is what is art activism. And then I will look into the diplomatic and democratic way of protest by highlighting James Scott's work. There are two important books. Yeah, I will show you later. And then I'm going to zoom in into indigenous rights, culture and protest movements. We were speaking about non-violent movement, non-violent protests. So I will be focusing on that. And I'm not going to go into a lot of topics, but discussing the previous work that can be taken as examples in way to protest, and then and also in a way to take sources for reporting. Yeah, and then I will just speak about the work of the Orang Asli, how they actually start this very slow but very effective movement. Silently, sometimes they protest, but the way of protesting is very visual on art activism. Okay, I purposely put here, like I would like to share with you what art is all about. You know, like I am very sure that you know what art is all about, but we also have to know that art has power. Yeah, I'm just going to read from here. So impactful art has the power to do more than just grab the audience attention. And that's the whole reason why we have paintings, we have very powerful visual documentaries, we have photos, we have murals, we have monuments. We also have, did I mention mural already? Also certain kind of assembles that has been put out in order to convey the message. Yeah. So most of these kind of things, like assembles of stuff like trees or branches or bottles or whatever, can be found all over the world, but we just don't pay attention to it. Okay, so it can send global messages of statement and solidarity. Yeah. So two important things here is messages of statement and solidarity, resonating with people around the world. Yeah, the intersection of art and activism has always existed. So through protest art to share messages of hope, or through graffiti on street art. Yeah, we don't really see much graffiti in Kuala Lumpur, but if you go to Europe, I think the most graffiti that I have ever seen in my life through my travels in Europe is in Eastern Europe. They actually dedicate the whole wall outside of the city just for graffiti. And they are so interesting to look at. I provide you here the website that I have taken this statement. Okay, so here is the meaning of activism. Yeah, so I will not use the word resistance. I will not use the words protest, but I will use the words activism, and I will tell you why I prefer activism rather than protest. And also resistance is not only because it is a kind of non-violent movement, but it's also very very capturing in so many different ways. Yeah, so activism is always about the challenge of changing power relations. So there are countless ways of engaging in activism and being an activist, but the goal of activism is action in order to create an effect. Of course, protests and also resistance, it has greater impact because it's real, it's out there, and you can be directly involved with it, and journalists can actually be directly involved and also to report what's going on there and then. Yeah, but it's different with art and activism. So Art, on the other hand, is quite broad. So it's very hard to describe like in terms of many physical and emotional forms. If I would compare art activism to the street protests, I would feel very emotional in then and there when I join a protest. But with art activism, it's going on the whole time, you know. So, but the goal of art has always been to evoke a certain meaning or feeling by the viewer or participant. It makes you think in much longer time. It lets you to dissolve what you see, you interpret. It might be the same interpretation as the others, but at least there is a kind of accumulative interpretations that basically journalists can come and ask each one of these people what do they think about the way certain event has been portrayed or presented. Yeah. Okay, so it combines the creative skills of arts to emotionally connect us to a form of activism where the goal is some sort of social change. So because in who we were speaking about emotion and also psychology, of course, during protests on the street, we have that kind of blood pumping emotions and all these kind of things. In my younger days, I used to join blockades with the Penan. I was in my first year, second year. So it was deep in the forest. There's no journalists. Okay. So all we could do is to defend what we believe need to be defended. I remember it was in it's a long time ago, 1992 during semester break. It was in Ulu Baram in Sarawak. And group of Penan, Kenya, and also the Kayan people, they wanted to go against this group of vloggers. One of the first group of vloggers, I don't want to mention the name here, but I think everybody knows. So we actually erected human barrier. It's so heart pumping. It's like, you know, it's kind of when you do bungee jumping or you jump from the plane. I don't know if any one of you has done that, you know, that kind of adrenaline that you have, and anything can happen at the time. And you see the bulldozers are coming, you know, like it was my first time. The Penan looks really cool. They just do their hands like that. But I was like, okay, is it going to stop in front of me? You know, that kind of feeling. So it's really scary. And that's the whole reason why it was my first and the last. And I would prefer just the one who take pictures and also to help my friend who is a journalist to write about it. Yeah. And I just do behind the scene kind of things. But it's really scary. And to be honest, I have not joined any Bersih movement because I'm just scared. But I do something else. It doesn't mean that I'm not supporting activism, but I'm doing something else other than just go to the street. Okay. I would like to acknowledge Professor Farid Alatas, because yesterday he was giving a seminar on theory and literature review. So he put up these two paintings here. So I put it under interpretations because he was talking about theory. But what I would like to highlight here is that how an event has been interpreted differently. I will explain to you why I did that. Okay. So the first one is hang on, I just want to look for my note because I don't really remember the whole story. Okay. So it is actually the earliest portrayal of art activism, I would call it, interpreting events to show power relations and story from the other side. This painting is actually about Diponegoro, or in the first painting is a Pangeran Diponegoro, yeah, a descendant of sultans of Yogyakarta, was passed over several times for ascension to the throne. So in 1825, after declaring himself Ratu Adil and his enemies infidels for their lax practice of Islam, he began a war against the reigning of Sultan and the Dutch colonial government. So in the 5-year struggle that followed, which was waged over much of Central Java, yeah, over 200,000 Javanese and 15,000 Dutch soldiers were killed. So on March 28, 1830, yeah, with most other guerrilla leaders captured, Diponegoro was invited to come to Lieutenant General de Kock's home in Magellan to negotiate and to end the hostilities and guaranteed safety of the passage. But after 3 hours, he was arrested. He was exiled to Makassar, Sulawesi, where he remained until his death. Okay, so the first painting, it was from Raden Saleh. And Saleh depiction is not the only painted version of Diponegoro's sculpture. You have the second painting. It was by a Dutch painter called Nicholas Pinaman. Yeah, so the earlier version by the Dutch painter, yeah, it was completed in 1835, and it shows rather than an angry, defiant man. Pinaman presented a submissive and beaten Diponegoro, okay, standing lower than his captor and symbolically having less power. Okay, so, but if you look at the other picture, the other painting, yeah, it is totally different. Prince Diponegoro stands defiant in front of that Dutch man, yeah, in front of the colonial officer's mansion. So he appears to be struggling to control his anger, as would be expected from Javanese gentry, yeah. And if you look at the face of the Dutchman, his eyes are static and avoid the eyes of the others. Okay, so these are different interpretations of two different scenes. So I guess it would apply in journalism as well. You know, like each journalist will report different things, but what most important is what that you are going to report. You know, are you going to just observe, or are you going to speak to the people who are really involved in that situation? Yeah. Okay, so these are the interesting websites that you can actually look at activism and also the history of activism, which I will not share, but you can just click on there and then you can do follow later. So now I just want to share with you, before I share this one, I would like to bring your attention to an event happened in France a few years ago, if you remember. Sometimes in November 2011, the newspaper office in the 20th arrondissement in Paris was firebombed and its website was hacked. Okay, does anyone recall that? The attacks were presumed to be linked to its decision to rename the edition of the 3rd November 2011 Charlie Hebdo. If you recognize the name Charlie Hebdo? Yeah, okay. It's a very historical event for France because it is something related to the freedom of speech. Yeah, and I do believe that in our country, we do not have that such opportunity and privilege. Okay, so in that situation, yeah, Charlie Hebdo with Muhammad listed as the editor-in-chief. Okay, so the cover featuring a cartoon of Muhammad saying 100 lashes of the whip if you don't die laughing. Yeah, it sounds funny. It's very like direct. If you are a French person, you would just laugh. I was in France when that happened. I wasn't laughing because I know it's going to touch the very core of the Muslim people, especially the extremists. Yeah. Okay. So, and because of that, yeah, a lot of things have happened. But the Sharia Hebdo issue has been a response to recent post-election introduction of Sharia law in Libya and the victory of the Islamist Party in Tunisia. Okay, so basically it was just trying to convey the message about the oppressions of women under Sharia, taking aim at domestic violence, mandatory veiling, burqas, restriction on freedom, forced marriage, stoning of those accused of adultery, and so on, so on, so on, including polygamy, flogging, stoning, gays and lesbian, forced marriage, and a lot of other things. Even though the message was very clear, but because it's a bit satirical, it stirs up the whole world of Islamic world. Yeah. So of course it ended up in bombing and everything. And then 2015, for example, they were making fun of, I can't say they were making fun because the message is really to give awareness and also to speak about something that other people might not want to speak about, you know. So, and because of that, they were shooting, bombing, and then finally some of them died. Yeah. So the website Charlie Hebdo went offline shortly after the shooting. And when it returned, it bore the legend, Je suis Charlie, meaning that I am Charlie. So I also had the t-shirt, I am Charlie, Je suis Charlie. So everybody who actually on the side of this event, they all wear Je suis Charlie on certain days. Yeah. Okay, so now back to Malaysia. We have Zunar. What happened to Zunar? How many times Zunar get arrested, being called to the police station? And his cartoon is not even as aggressive as satirical Charlie Hebdo. So that is how much freedom of speech, non-freedom of speech that we have in Malaysia. Okay. And just recently again, he was called by the Kedah state government because he did a cartoon which lampooned the Kedah state government's decision to cancel the Thai Pusang public holiday, which was published on Facebook on January 23rd. Yeah, I think it was reported by a Malaysia Kini journalist, Ko Jun Lin. Yeah, yeah. Actually, Malaysia Kini is my favorite news. I even subscribe because I feel that you can only find the real news on Malaysia Kini. I mean, no hard feelings for other media, but I do feel that this is the best platform. And the other one is Sarawak Report. And of course, you know what happened to Sarawak Report with Mrs. Brown's stories and cases, you know. So, and there's another type of activism, which I like very much, is through Freedom Film Fest, which is also in Malaysia. And the most powerful one, which I still remember until today, was the one from Agnes Padan. If you remember, if you did attend that, it was speaking about, you know, her determination to ensure that rural communities in Sarawak to have the right to proper healthcare and equal access to amenities. I mean, just imagine in this century, we do still have people in Sarawak who die because of childbirth. Why? Because there's no access to healthcare, there's no access to hospitals, to clinics. It's too far. You know, even if you have a clinic nearby, but there's only normal people. It's just a dresser. We call it staff. And every time you get sick, whether you have stomach ache, headache, or diarrhea, or whatever, they'll only prescribe you Panadol. Yeah. So she was trying to advocate this. And I'm surprised that journalists did not do detailed interview with her about the real situations happening in Sarawak. So it was a bit disappointing, but it was good to watch the documentary. Yeah. So I highlight the quote I have from James Scott. It said, most of the political life of subordinate groups is to be found neither in the overt collective defiance of power holders, nor in complete hegemonic compliance, but in the vast territory between these two polar opposites. Okay. James Scott is my favorite author. I read both books. I was forced to read these books when I did anthropology in UKM, but I found it really good that I read it again and again. Why? Because he basically he studies the effects of green revolution in rural Malaysia. So one of the main objectives of the study is to make an argument that the Marxian and Gramscian ideas of false consciousness and hegemony are incorrect. Okay, so why do I I highlight weapons of the week. Yeah? So art activism occurs in everyday life, and art activism is the political life and movement of the subordinate groups. And James Scott basically speak about the orang asli. Yeah, and that's the whole reason why I chose the case study of orang asli today. So as James Scott noted, yes, he said that he basically provides another perspective on hegemony and invisible power that has been both influential and also controversial. So in his book, Weapons of the Weak, Everyday Forms of Resistance, he basically introduced the idea that oppression and resistance are in constant flux, and that by focusing on visible historic events, such as organized rebellions or collective action, we can easily miss subtle but powerful forms of everyday resistance. So being a journalist, maybe you can relate to what I was saying. Yeah. So he basically looked at the peasant and slave societies and their ways of responding to domination. Okay, so imagine the orang asli land rights issues with state government. Okay, so he basically look at how do you call that? He focused not on observable acts, which is very obvious, right? We always report on the very obvious observable acts, but he insisted that if you would really like to see how nonviolent resistance take place, you have to observe the non-observable acts of rebellion, yeah, on forms of cultural resistance and non-cooperation that are employed over time through the course of persistent servitude. So reporting is not just about, I'm not a journalist, I'm not a reporter, but it is based on research experience. You cannot make a conclusion or to write something just then and there. You know, it's always like you need to go back again and again and again. I mean, at least that's what I do when I do my research. So, however, what interests me more is what he studied, the actions that the indigenous people studied. So his research finds that overt peasant rebellions are actually rather uncommon. So it does not occur when and where expected, and often don't have much impact. Rather than seeing resistance as organization, he actually looked at less visible everyday forms of resistance, such as foot dragging, evasion, false compliance, pilfering, feigned ignorance, slander, and sabotage. Yeah. So he finds this in rural and factory settings, and also among the middle class and elite, for example, especially with through tax evasion or conscriptions. Yeah. But particularly among the rural people who are physically dispersed and less politically organized than urban populations. So, and he also looked at closely linked to the idea of resistance, where his notion of transcript, hidden and public, which are established ways of behaving and speaking that fit particular actors in particular social settings, whether dominant or oppressed. Yeah. So therefore, what he says was resistance is a subtle form of contesting public transcript by making use of prescribed roles and language to resist the abuse of power, including things like rumor, gossip, disguise, linguistic tricks, metaphor, euphemisms, folktales, ritual, gesture, and anonymity. Yeah. So you can actually find that on page 137 if you read the book. So these methods are particularly effective in situations where violence is used to maintain the status quo, allowing a veiled discourse of dignity and self-assertion within the public transcript. So in which ideological resistance is disguised, muted, and veiled for safety's sake. So non-violent, safety, everybody can go home peacefully. So these forms of resistance require little coordination or planning. Yeah, and are used by both individuals and groups to resist without directly confronting or challenging elite norms. Okay, so this is really, really important when one would like to look at the resistance or art activism of indigenous people. Yeah, in Malaysia, particularly the Orang Asli and also the Penan. And now come the Kayan, Kenyah, the Iban talking about land rights, how their land has been taken by Old Palm, for example. Okay, now I'm going to zoom in into a more specific topic where art activism has been used effectively to convey the message of the Orang Asli to various state government. Yeah. Okay. Before that, I would just like to bring your attention to a few situations of the Orang Asli in Malaysia, in case some of you do not know. So Orang Asli is a legal term under Act 134 that address more than 39 different groups. Yeah, specifically, there's 3 different big groups of Orang Asli as Orang Asli. So you don't actually translate the term Orang Asli to indigenous people because the term itself is a legal term. It's their name. Okay, so it means just the original people. Yeah, so Orang Asli, they have resist, they have protests, they involved in Bersih. They have put up barrier blockades at the borders of their land with state land. They have their social movement as well, like Jaringan Kampung Orang Asli Malaysia, which is actually founded by an Orang Asli woman called Tija. Okay? So they have done a lot of things, but a lot of things that they have done are silent. They don't really put it out there in order for the public to know. Okay, so these are very interesting things that should be published because it's something that without the motivations of strong, powerful NGOs or individuals, it's really coming from the community itself. What lacking in our Malaysian journalism is that the community voice is very small. We always, in the report that I read, yeah, there's a lot of news that I read news every day, including Malaysia Kini as well. Sometimes it's just highlighting the events, but there is no community voice. There's no visible community voice to really speak about this situation. It does not engage emotionally. It's like when you read the news, you just read the news and then tomorrow you forget, It does not leave that kind of impact. I would really like to read a news about certain events that make me cheer up or make me wouldn't be able to sleep at night. So that is the kind of journalism that is not yet there in our country, I feel. I mean, this is just my criticism. I hope no hard feelings here. Okay, so there are a few situations that Orang Asli are facing. Like it has been reported that there are actually like the Orang Asli community who live in Hutan Simpan, Kuala Langat Utara, Forest Reserve, for example. Just recently, they were traveled there. 250 individuals from 12 different villages actually went to see the Selangor Menteri Besar and then would reconsider the proposal of degazetting as the forest as a bequest from the ancestors. And then you have the 2 blockades that were erected by the Orang Asli in the Chunek village in Perak, beginning of the year, for example. And then you have the Temia Orang Asli of Guamusang, Kelantan. And then in 2019, a very big event. I think it was covered quite nicely, attended by 1,000 Orang Asli leaders and advocates for the National Orang Asli Convention, yeah, with the Ministry of Rural Development, and 136 resolutions was covering different aspects of Orang Asli lives, and then promising change by the speech of Dr. Mahathir at the time about acknowledging principle of free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC, to ensure that every planned development and welfare program will benefit the community by not sidelining their interests. And of course, this year, you have 40 Penans from Sarawak, for example, still having this kind of problem. Different type of protests. But what I feel that really effective is a protest like you see on the slide there. This kind of art activism. And the artist, temuan artist Shak Koyo, yeah. So he did this. He's a very close friend of mine. So he used to exhibit his art, which exclusively features around Asli folk and various aspects of their life. Okay, so he basically believed that in combining art and activism, and that's why he will not keep silent when his own village is under threat. So he was one of the individual who lead his whole village in protesting silently. They were putting up like signage on the tree, on the Instagram. Everybody was doing something and write something, put on the Instagram. You know, like I think Zakia was mentioning about how social media is very effective in to bring mass protests, mass resistance. So it really works thanks to this digital platform. Yeah. So this is how he conveyed the message about loss of land, about taking of land and abuse of land rights of the Orang Asli. This image is very powerful. The first time I saw this image, I was like, wow, this is very, very powerful. With the clouds, with the black palm oil, and there is no green at all left. It really shows how palm oil kill our land, how palm oil kill the Orang Asli land. And with the traditional clothes, he just looked at that. And to my mind, when I see this, I feel like crying actually the first time I saw this. Yeah, it really touched your emotion, you know, like the sadness. Okay, but unfortunately, when this painting was published in the newspaper, they were just talking about Shah. They were not talking about the message that he was trying to convey through his painting. And that was very disappointing. And he himself was saying the same. He said, I'm trying to use media to convey my message. I'm not a journalist. I can only paint, but hopefully that somebody will publish what I see, what I think about my painting, through my painting. You know, he even put confession of oil palm. You know exactly what's going on. So it would be nice if there is, every time there is issue about palm oil, you just put this image, you just put another image, you know, and you speak about what was going on. It will totally capture the public audience. Yeah. So this is another painting of his. When I first saw this, I did not actually see the gray part of the painting. I was focusing on the lady and I saw green. After I look at that lady, only then I realized there is actually two different phases of landscape in this painting. And this painting was hanging at the research center from 2018 until 2020. A lot of students came to the research center. The first thing they saw was, they said, Doctor, this painting is very powerful because it shows the change. It shows the negative impact of development. You know, students can actually see, and it's very, very strong. And I was supposed to teach a course called Sustainable Development. And it get them to think about, okay, sustainable development. Is development really sustainable? You know, so finally, I have to change the course, sustainable versus development, because development does not mean progress. So this painting actually changed the whole course and changed the perspective of my students when they think about progress because of projects, because of top-bottom development towards the indigenous people and also towards any other who has been affected. Yeah. Okay. But again, it was never reported that way. This picture came out many times in the newspaper. Now, Chat Koyot does not only advocate on ecosystem, palm oil, land rights, but he also advocate on art itself. Yeah. So he used to use canvas and do a lot of his own technique. But finally, a few years ago, he started to paint on tikar mangkuang, woven mat. And then I asked him, I said, why do you use tikar mangkuang? He was saying, we all know that tikar mangkuang is used on the floor. And the floor is always the lowest level and rank because we step on it. So he said, I just want to put tikar mangkuang as something that can be appreciated as art instead just putting it on the floor. And therefore, I paint on it. He said. So each of the tikar mangkuang that he used to paint, he never put it on the floor. Of course, because nicely painted, you put it in the frame. So he changed totally the perceptions of the tikar mangkuang. Okay. But what reported is only reported that new technique of sharp look drawing on the woven mat, but no one ever asked what is the significance of painting on the woven mat. See, these are the aspects that we always leave out. Yeah, and then he only paints ladies who actually weave the mat, and I was asking him to paint me on the mat, and he just casually said, if you weave your mat, then I will paint you on your mat, you know, but that's never going to happen. Yeah, so he is advocating not just for the ecosystem, environment, but also the product that comes out in the environment in order to make people to know that these are all coming from the environment, that it has to be appreciated by putting the faces that he loves. Yeah, I have a lot to share, but I think I will need to be very fast. How much time I have? Okay, so this one is very interesting as well. Okay, 10 minutes. He basically drew this old guy here, as you can see. And this old guy is the community leader who joined with him to lead his village people and other villages to go for protests. They even went to Bersih, you know. So in order to honor him and to speak to the world that this man is very important, the most progressive Orang Asli leader, he painted him on the mat that his wife woven and has brought this painting everywhere in his exhibition by speaking about his involvement, his role, his important role as the headman to bring the community to be aware of their rights. This is a very sentimental story for me. I am an activist too. That's the reason why I use art activism. So here, I'm using art activist to do my activism. And I was heading Center for Malaysian Indigenous Studies. And the purpose of me doing this, because I want to show to Universiti Malaya that, look, Indigenous people in this higher institution is very significant. Why there is no division of Indigenous studies? Why Indigenous courses are not offered? Why Indigenous culture have not been introduced in this university? We have a huge numbers of faculties. Not even a single one has Indigenous studies. So I asked Shah to draw in this double-story building. So there's another one that he painted. The Orang Asli Boy. And that Orang Asli Boy painting was actually sponsored by Education New Zealand. And New Zealand High Commissioner even came to officiate that painting and have a small ceremony. And at the bottom, I was asking Brendan Scott to draw the master weaver that I have worked with, because she has been awarded as the master weaver of UNESCO, but nobody ever give her recognition. So my way to give recognition is by collaborating with Shah and also Brendan to put these faces. But what I didn't know is that Universiti Malaya doesn't allow faces. And at one point, I was actually asked to paint over this mural. But as an act of protest, I refused. So I just refused to answer the email, basically. So the mural painting is still there, but I'm out of the center. But at least it's still standing there. So please go and take pictures and please tell our stories, because this is the only place at public university you can see the faces of indigenous people. That's the Center for Malaysian Indigenous Studies. Those are those beautiful murals. And some people complain saying that these faces looking so scary. But international students would go there and take pictures and say, this is beautiful. It strongly advocates the indigenous people. So we have two different kind of, local versus foreign ideas. That's me standing there just to show that this is my space and I have the right to be there and I have the right to defend that building, but I am no longer be able to be there. And this is the pictures with the New Zealand High Commissioner proudly officiated that face there. Okay, I don't think we have much time, but Lenny Magno, what interesting about her, she's also Temuan, she's a contemporary artist. I would like you okay, I would like you to look into her YouTube videos, how she draws. So it's all about her drawings. But if you realize, there's an orange flower here. There's another type of flower. There's another type of flower. There's all with flowers. I asked people, did they notice the flowers? They said, oh, we just look at how she drew. We just ask her, what is her vision, her mission, but no one ever asked why different flowers and what does each flower symbolize. She was trying to convey her cultural heritage. The meaning of the flowers actually means something, but nobody has ever asked. But I asked her personally. Yeah. So I just want to conclude here. So as you can see there, various art activism. So communicating new perspective, questioning the status quo, speaking out about belief, and inspiring others to take action. Art and activism often share some of the same underlying motivation. So it's just that it's like the painting of Diponegoro. You just have to look at many different angles. Yeah. Sometimes we tend to see just one way street. We seldom do a U-turn and go the same way, So it's good to get lost sometimes. You do U-turn and you revisit the space. So this is, the political world is a cultural world. So everyday act of resistance is actually everyday lifestyles. Even you have your act of activism. Each day what we do to prove our points, it is an art of activism. Okay, I will stop here.